Just a minute or two, please go ahead, get comfortable. We do encourage you to take notes, so whether that's on your phone, whether that's on paper and pen, we will have a QR code up on the screen, and that'll take you to a page where you can virtually take notes on your phone, if that works. But yeah, we're just gonna wait another minute or two, let everyone get settled, and then we'll get started. Did that work?
Pass one back and forth, or do you each?
We could pass one back and forth. Would that be easier?
No, you
I'm
can
not
have
sure.
both. Just
Okay.
you don't need to turn them off and on each time you speak. You can just leave it on.
Oh,
Just make sure
okay.
before you actually start the presentation.
Okay. Amiga, ¿tú prefieres usar solo un mic y moverlo uno a la otra o con la de nosotros? Él dice solo no hay que apagarla y prenderla, pero solo tenemos que asegurarnos que esté prendida cuando estemos dando la presentación.
No
Yo
hay que
decía,
apagarlo y prender, mantenerlo prendido.
entonces,
Puedes ver aquí. Okay. So I have to talk louder, right?
very loud.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to start saying thank you to our sponsors and to all of you that are here. Okay. So my name is Pilar, and this is my co-founder, Stephanie Palacios. We run a tech company that is helping remote teams build positive culture using 3 elements: science, gamification, and analytics. And the reason we are here is because we believe it's so important to share with you what we have found from our journey, our experience, and expertise. So we've been building, and we are super passionate about building culture for remote teams. And to answer the question that everyone came here to looking the answer for why happy hours are not enough, we divide our session in 3 parts. So first, we're going to talk about what are the common mistakes to build remote culture. And then we're going to talk about what are the science and key metrics to measure happiness at work. And lastly, we are going to get hands-on building your roadmap. So this is me. If you're wondering at this point where this beautiful accent come from, I'm from Colombia. I moved to the US 4 years ago, and through this journey, I've been able to bring together 3 of my main passions. The first one is remote teams and leadership. For over 10 years, I've been working remotely as a project manager for multicultural teams across Latin America, as a business consultant and marketing research. The second is empathy and community building. For those that are not familiar with the situation in Colombia, we lived 60 years of internal war. In 2016, the government signed a peace treaty. What that meant is for our communities, we needed to rebuild peace. So I had the privilege to work with the government and a multidisciplinary team, creating spaces in our country where we can build empathy, dialogue, and connection among war victims and the government and local communities. And lastly, technology and entrepreneurship. I went to MIT, got certified in leadership for new ventures, and using that knowledge, I've been creating empathetic technology, and that's how we are joining forces to create Onda. And with that, I want to introduce to you my co-founder, Dr. Stephanie Palacios.
Thank you. Let's see. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Stephanie Palacios. It is so great to be here with you all Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, especially because we're like here in this part of North Rhino, which I know is a little removed from the rest of DSW. So we really appreciate it. We're really excited to share what we have for you today. A little bit about myself. So I'm going to go through the same three-step piece. So my focus is on organizational well-being, and I come to this area from my intersection of my professional experience and training and my personal experience as well. So professionally, the CV, the resume, I've studied at Johns Hopkins, I've studied at Northwestern and CU Boulder. I feel very deeply grateful for those experiences, especially as a first-generation Latina, first in my family to go to college in the US, first in the entire extended family. So it was really, we're all learning together, what does this mean? Applying, FAFSA, like all that good stuff. We all learned it together as a huge family. And after all of that, I was in the last end of my graduate program when I survived a very traumatic personal experience. In 2016, I was in Baltimore at Hopkins when I was abducted for a week. And I only survived because I escaped. And I often tend to actually give entire keynote speeches on that experience and what I learned through it and what that was like, coming out of that with someone who was almost finishing a degree in clinical psychology, and how that helped me throughout that week, but also ever since then. I took 2 years off from school to heal from all the injuries that I had that spanned across 13 facets of medicine. And then I had to ask myself that difficult question: what do I do now? And what is my life going to look like now? Do I even believe in helping people anymore after everything I've been through? I did some deep heart, and soul searching, and the answer was yes, I absolutely still believe in this. But now I'm going to unapologetically be authentic to what matters most to me. And so what that meant was continuing my studies. I returned to school, I finished my doctorate, and I said, I'm gonna go for the biggest star in the sky that my family has always talked about, Harvard, and I got in. So I did my postdoc there. I specialized in mindfulness and primary care. And what I've done since then is I've taken that along with the decade that I've done organizational consulting, and I put that all together. And what that's looked like for me is that second piece. It's helping teams, it's helping the individuals on those teams, it's helping systems to recognize what matters most to you, what helps you to live a meaningful life, and how can we help you to tap into that every single day, not just when you're on vacation for a week. Also mindfulness, it's something that has deeply helped me through my own journey, and so I'm a mindfulness teacher through Harvard as well as my own LLC. But I'm very excited to bring all this experience and expertise into tech. And so this is a new space for me. I've had an amazing time the last year and a half learning what does it mean to be in the tech space as a clinical psychologist? What does it mean to be in the tech space as someone who's actually saying, hold on, let's slow down a sec. What actually matters here? What is, false urgency versus true urgency? And how can we make your company truly stand for something as opposed to just trying to make a profit? And for us, that means coming and looking at it at the team level, which we'll get into even more in a minute.
Great. So to kickstart now our workshop, we want to start with a question for you. And it goes to what is culture for you, and we would love you to answer this prompt. I feel happy and thrive at work when...
if anyone does not have a phone and needs a printout, we don't have very many, but we have one. So please put your hand up and we'll bring it to you.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Okay. So... Okay. Let's see some of it. Get it?
All right, so let's take a look at the answers that are coming in from all of you. So we have things like feeling happy and that you're thriving at work, when you have support, when you're learning and growing, when you're with your coworkers, when you're allowed to make mistakes. I love that one.
When I'm trusted.
When you're rested, when you feel trusted, when you can be creative. Thank you so much for contributing to this. And I think we can all learn from each other, right? So what are the patterns that we're seeing here in these answers? I would be looking at this. I'm going to put my therapist hat on for just a second. I'd be like, ooh, this gives me insight on what matters to you most. This also gives me insight into how you are leading your teams, into how you participate or don't participate in the team that you are in. Anytime that you feel this, you're going to participate more. Anytime that you don't, you're going to pull away. And we want to tap into that, not just for you as a leader, but for your entire team as well. So, looking a little bit at the science behind culture, we believe that these types of messages, like what you just gave us on the last prompt, that's what helps to build and create culture. And so we come up with that question, right? Like, what is culture? On the one hand, we have culture from the sense of what you see on a company's website, what the CEO stands in front of people and says their values are. What we believe culture and values actually are is what's cultivated within 5 to 10 people at a time. So we're looking at those smaller teams. And it is possible for each team to have a slightly different culture. And so we want to, again, pay attention to that. What means most to these particular people who are constantly working together? How can we encourage that? How can we empower them through that? And what we believe is that psychological safety is at the center of all of it. It's not just us, and it's not just through the research that we have done through Bonda, our company. It's also, we found an amazing extensive survey and study that was done by Google as well with their employees. They also came to the same conclusion. Psychological safety is at the core of building successful and positive culture. And when we can assure ourselves that we have psychological safety, these other three will start to come. You'll start to see more trust among your teammates with each other and with the leader of that team. They'll start to feel that they belong more, and they'll start to feel more connected. So we still have the question, what's psychological safety? It's the idea that we're able and we're safe in expressing ourselves authentically. That I am willing to take that risk to tell you how I feel, what I need, what I'm going through, and I know that you're going to be able to hold that and create space for me. And it's very controversial right now, right? That is at the wave of the Great Resignation. People are leaving in huge throngs because this is missing. And so we believe this is really at the forefront right now of HR tech, but way beyond that, of empowering teams at every level.
Yeah, and with that phase, we also interviewed some workers, not only CEOs and heads of people and the leaders of the companies, but also what is in the minds of the workers, what is culture for them. And what we found is that they feel psychological safety with these three elements: connection, belonging, and trust. So when we ask CEOs and people leaders, okay, how are you cultivating belonging, connection, and trust in your organization? We hear a lot of the strategies where we do happy hours, we do random games after work. Some others say we run retreats, workshops, DEI trainings. So we categorize these strategies into two big buckets. The first one was a structured connection. That meant that they were creating moments for their team to learn about each other. So they could create and structure a meeting where they are asking meaningful questions to their teams and also driving dialogue between them. And the other, it's unstructured connections. These are more entertaining based and one-off events that you create, such as cooking classes, playing random games. We found both are important to have in your organization. What matters is the weight and the frequency that you put to one or another. So what we found is that 77% of the organizations are relying more into unstructured connection.
And then, of course, the clinical psychologist asked herself, why? What is going on? What's behind this? And is this working? And so we started looking at the data that we gathered through these customer discovery meetings and these in-depth meetings we had with these companies, with these heads of people, with these C-level execs, with these managers. And we asked, tell us a little more about this. How is this working or not working for you? What's missing? What would you like to see more of? What is the time suck? And this is what we saw as far as patterns go. When we're looking at those structured connection strategies, so more intentional, those events where they truly are created for people to connect, the patterns we saw that those did tend to promote positive behavior within the team. They tended to promote things like belonging, trust, and connection, which garnered better productivity, employee engagement. They were hitting their numbers more often. And they allowed a space for the team members to find shared commonalities they otherwise wouldn't have known without these events, where you're just being a little more, less professional, more personal, right? With the unstructured events, the patterns that we saw from what we heard from these leaders was that they kind of fell flat. They didn't really lead to a whole lot, and there was this concern that they tended to be non-inclusive. Non-inclusive of people, especially who tend to be more introverted, who suddenly feel that they're being forced to participate in this social event if they want to show up. Oftentimes non-inclusive of people who don't drink for religious or personal reasons, or frankly, have other obligations in their life and they don't want to go somewhere from 5 to 7 after working an entire day for you. And so the last piece that we also saw is that those unstructured ones tended to be that once a month happy hour, once a month bowling, that type of thing. And what do across those two categories, there were these commonalities at the foundation that we saw. One is frequency. So we want to put this on your radar. We're going to keep bringing it up today. Frequency is key. From a psychological standpoint, you want someone to feel connected, increase the amount of times that you have contact with them, right? I think that's also like a basic fundamental in sales as well. Extra time and energy that's required. We heard again and again and again. They were like, I am exhausted. I work all day. And then on top of that, I'm setting aside on average 14 hours. Was it a week or a month? A month in planning these events that are unpaid, that have to come out of my personal time. And then the last piece, entertainment versus connection. So they're left with, I've spent all this time planning this thing, I've coordinated it, I get to it, and only a quarter of the people show up. And we try and make do, but then at the end I'm left asking, did this work? And a lot of leaders don't have a set way to measure whether these strategies are even working.
And a quick note here, when Stephanie mentions frequency, it's important to have it frequent, but it doesn't have to be long things. It can be just like 15 minutes, or even starting your meetings with, how was your weekend? Things like that will help to build connection in your teams.
Such a good point. Brevity. The duration wasn't as important as the frequency. And so it led us to this question, how can we help companies to figure out if their strategies are even working? And the ways that companies are currently tapping into this are, well, we give out quarterly surveys. We use Culture Amp, things like that, which are fantastic. And you can garner a lot of valuable data from that. The problem is, how well would you know someone if you only talk to them once every 3 months? And that's typically how often these surveys take place, or once a month, right? Because they're long form, and you're trying to avoid survey fatigue. So you're balancing wanting to avoid bothering your employees, but at the cost of not knowing them. And so we're thinking there has to be a better way. We're going to give you this roadmap to building positive culture. We're going to go through these 3 indicators that we've mentioned to you, belonging, trust, and connection, through psychological safety, keeping in mind these other pieces. So to start off, your guiding principles. Engage briefly. As Pili mentioned, it can be 15 minutes, and you will see the impact if you do that once a week. Frequency kind of goes hand in hand, once a week. Team level involvement. So again, we want to get away from this idea that it has to be multiple departments at once, that it has to be a company-wide thing. Leave that for the quarterly. But on a weekly basis, there should be a higher touch with your team on an interpersonal level. We want to help you to track your metrics. How do you know whether this is working or not? And best of all, keep it as simple as possible. No one wants to be like, oh gosh, now I have to create like another Zoom on my calendar for this interpersonal thing that now I have to put effort into. We want to avoid all that. We want to make it clear this is not going into your annual review. This is for us to connect and for me to understand how I can help you be empowered at work and kick ass at work. Quick reminder, that QR code, I'm trying to think, do you want to put it up real quick?
Yep.
It will lead you to a few different things. You'll see you can go to our website through there, but more importantly for this workshop right now, you can also go to this worksheet that we're about to go through. And it'll go section by section. So we'll have it up on the PowerPoint, but you can also have it on your phone. And again, we do have some paper copies, so if anyone needs that, please just put a hand up, and I don't mind. I'll walk right up to you and bring it to you.
Okay.
All right. So first we're going to look at belonging as that very first indicator. And the way that I define belonging is the felt sense of authentic community. So it's really that piece of how are you cultivating a team as opposed to single people in silos that just touch once or twice a week, right? It's that interconnectivity. It's that sense of how are we working together, the gestalt of it, right? The gestalt of multiple pieces together have more value together than apart. And what we have found when we've looked at our data, when we've looked at other data, is that belonging trickles down into various parts that frankly tend to matter when you're looking at business metrics. It helps to improve employee engagement. It helps to improve productivity. It helps to improve communication among teammates and with their leaders as well. And Qualtrics did this amazing, massive study. I highly recommend you read it if you're a nerd like me and love learning about this stuff. They did a study in 2020 with 11,800 employees. I mean, I don't know, I was in shock when I read that number. And they found that belonging was the strongest driver of employee engagement and employee wellness from a mental well-being standpoint.
So now that you know the definition of belonging, we would love you to think about 3 values that you see in your team that you would like to celebrate more. And if you have a paper and a pen, just write it on there, following this guidance.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
No
Yeah.
problem. Anyone else want a worksheet?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Really have. And now, if you already listed your 3 values that you want to celebrate more with your team, what are those like three ideas that come to your mind that how you can celebrate those values in your organization with your team? Activar participación, que ellos compartan.
All right, so only if you are comfortable doing so, and keeping in mind that this is a space where we want to all learn from each other. The best way to get ideas are events like this. You might hear new things you haven't thought of before. Let's look at that first square. Is anyone willing to share 1, 2, or 3 values that come to mind immediately when you think of your team and you say, if I had to describe my team to someone who's never met them before, this is how I would describe them? Yes? Joy and autonomous. Thank you. Any others?
Yeah,
Fearless. Ooh, I
Wow.
love that one. Okay. Yes, please. Dedicated.
Dedicated.
Wonderful. Collaboration and trust.
Key.
And how about moving on to the second square? Any ideas of ways that you just thought of to help your team to celebrate those values that they already harness?
One of the values I put down was freedom to fail, and how we do that is celebrating mistakes and then how you learn from it
Thank you for sharing that. I'll repeat that just so everyone can hear. So allowing people to fail and learning from it as a value, and then creating space for the team to actually be able to talk about what happened and then what they can garner from it.
Celebration.
And celebrate it.
That's a great
Wonderful. And if anyone is wondering, like, actually, I kind of need help with an idea for my value, we can also do this as a team effort. Does anyone have a value that they're feeling stuck on? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, you were
candor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. So the value is candor, and how do you reward or encourage candor as opposed to, and I'm kind of guessing here, reading through the lens a little bit, like what our society might tend to do, which is to punish candor in the workplace. How do we encourage it on a team level? I totally agree with what you said. So finding ways to purposefully say, this is fantastic. We want your feedback. Asking the team, how would you prefer to give this feedback that we want to hear? Do you want to do it anonymously? Do you want to do it as a team and have like a little fireside chat with someone? Do you want to just have a session together where we can talk about these things? Do we bring in a speaker to talk about this? Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And also regarding trust, because that is related with the value of trust, is you as a member of your team as a leader, first displaying vulnerability, sharing something about you first that allows your team to feel comfortable for them to also to share with you. So lastly, we want to just check what day of the week do you think you can run your initiative? Like when are you thinking that you are going to ask your team or create that moment for your team? Once you know the frequency that you want to do it, think about some metrics of success. How are you going to measure that it's working? Maybe it's like how many members of your team were vulnerable during your meeting. Or maybe it's how many of them share their failures.
Mm-hmm. I'll go one step further and say you could even, if it's more of a structured exercise that you're thinking of, creating a few different levels of vulnerability, and then noting, how vulnerable is my team right now? How much belonging do we have, right? How many people chose that easier, shallow question? And that's okay. Gives you your baseline. How many people chose the intermediate? How many people were like, let's do this thing? And you can gauge that, and that will start to give you a metric to follow. All right, so the next indicator we're gonna look at is connection. And we think of connection as coming from shared commonalities between people on a team. And this goes across the board, right? This can be something like professional values, career aspirations, milestones that they wanna hit. So this can very much be still housed under professional development. This can also go beyond that, right? How many of us here are foodies? How many of us here have a dog? How many of us here, et cetera. It can go on and on. But the more that we can help the team to recognize the commonalities that they have, we're creating space so that when there's differences, those can be okay. There can be space to accept that. We can hold each other. This is also a moment where once you've noticed the commonalities, you can also notice where people's strengths and unique talents lie. Okay, I'm great at this. We have this shared goal, but she's great at this other thing. Let me go to her when I have these questions now that I know that. And I feel safe doing that because I already know that we've established that we have this shared goal. And that's the way that we see connection impacting business at the interpersonal team level. When we go beyond that to, the fancy ROIs and all that good stuff, there was a study of 733 work relationships that noticed and found that it was more about perceived closeness that fed into connection than actual physical proximity. That finding is incredible when we think of what we're going through right now. We all during the pandemic, or I shouldn't say we all, a lot of us had to go remote, had to go hybrid, Now, it's this ongoing question of what are companies going to do? What model are they going to follow? But we're seeing a trend of sticking to remote or at least a hybrid model. And the question is, but how do I help my people to still connect if we're remote? I don't like connecting to someone through a Zoom. Well, the answer is actually research has found it has nothing to do with being together in person, the physical proximity. It has to do with the perceived closeness. You can force me to come into an office, but if I don't feel that I connect with my team, it's not going to help me feel any closer to them. And so it's less about the actuality of it and more about what are you doing to create those bonds between the team. And in that way, we think the future of the modern workplace is really going to hold on to that and say, how do we build this piece remotely? How do we do it in a hybrid form, which is exactly what we focus on.
So now we would love you to think, what is one question that you would like to ask someone to ask you in order to better understand you? And if you already thought on that question, now think about what is a question that will help you to understand others. Is it the same question, or probably you have another way to learn more about other team members? If any of you would like to share what is one question that will help us to understand you better, please raise your hand.
I mean, this is for me, but also I feel like for other people, like I always try to find out what motivates people, like why, right? Like, so you always assume a lot of things, like, oh, they just want more money or they want more this, but obviously that's not the case. So I think like just trying to figure out what motivates your employees or why am I doing what I'm doing.
Nice, asking why.
What motivates my team? What motivates me to be here and to be doing the work that I'm doing?
Love that question. How are you feeling? Yeah. Like, how are you feeling?
Yeah, how do you feel about yourself?
Oh,
When do you feel like you're at your best?
okay.
When do you feel that you're at your best?
Love.
And that could give you so much insight into, tapping into peak performance, tapping into what's passionate about them, and stuff you're in.
Wow. Right.
So when is a time that you felt safe at work?
Love
And that also would give you so much insight into how do we recreate that? What tenets were there that we can easily apply to other areas of contact? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the opposite of that question, right? When have you felt really safe at work? And for those who are comfortable answering, when have you felt unsafe at work? And that would just garner so much rich data on how you can create and craft these spaces and protect those spaces and protect your employees.
Love those questions. Thank you for sharing. And now that you have the questions, we want you to think about how are you going to create that space for your team? And give it a name. So you can make it fun and you can give it a purpose for your team. How does it look like? And when are you going to hold that space during the week? And once again, think about how are you going to measure that?
Yeah.
As part of our DE&I initiative, we have resource groups, and so it's, there's all, like, we have 10 or something like that. And they have really great participation, and, there's communication, constantly meetings, but there's also just open dialogue.
Right.
Most senior people really aren't involved sort sort of by design, so there's like a comfort there. So I'm not like always in to know it. But is that like, would that fall into this, or is that too structured from like an organizational standpoint? Because for us, we find people who are part of the resource groups tend to stay like in their jobs and feel like they have something else besides work that they're like not responsible for, but participating in.
Right,
But
right.
it feels structured based on what you guys are talking about, maybe too much. So I'm just wondering what your take is on it.
Ooh. So there was this question about like a DE&I group at work where it's purposefully protected from the higher ups so that employees feel that they have a safe space to discuss things. But the question is, how do we know when it's too structured? How do we know when we're asking too much of those employees? Looking at this like from my perspective, I would say checking in, is there anything that's being mandatory or obligated? If not, that's fantastic, really keeping it volunteer level. The other piece would be allowing a space where they are communicating with the higher ups in like an anonymous, aggregated, this is the data we've collected. This is what we need from you.
We have representatives that do that.
Fantastic. They have reps that do this. And then having actionable strategies. So not just, high in the sky, like we'd love a little more this and that. What is an actionable strategy with a timeline, with a set goal?
Really crushing it.
Amazing.
That's helpful, though. I feel like
Yeah.
that's really like the base of our structure. That's helpful.
Perfect. Those are the pieces I would look at. Beely, is there anything you would look at
No,
besides
I
that?
think you covered. Yeah, one of the things that just also checking your team, because sometimes DEI feels like, oh, like again, I have to go to this training. But it's more like, do you see people coming to those meetings, and what is the feelings and emotions that space is evoking for them, and checking with them. And another strategy also, me as a Latina in a big organization, something that I found helpful was having an ally inside the organization, but like knowing, oh, I can go to that person if I'm feeling discriminated, and it doesn't have to be HR. It can be one of us. So that's great.
And that actually reminds me of something I saw happen at Harvard that I would highly recommend. Is we had our group, our D&I group as well, but then they actually asked us if we wanted to bring in external support. We said yes, and they actually brought in someone who has experience as a therapist or social worker, I can't remember right now, in teams. And she came in not to lead it, but just like as I don't even want to say the word moderator, it was like support. Like, do you want any support? Should we break this down? Should we process this a little bit? And so there was that opportunity to create, I don't want to say group therapy because it wasn't that, but it was like group support with an external person who's coming in who has the expertise of organizational psych, team building, and then she could kind of be a soundboard for them, which can be really great like before the rep goes and talks to the company. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Anyone wants to share? I'm curious if you already given a name to your event. If you want to share one of the names of your events, it'll be fun. Yeah. All right. Let's continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Job, work environment, people, again, after years of dealing with people,
Right.
and they're struggling with how do we help them?
Yeah, totally.
Mentor
So Mentor Mondays,
That's awesome.
especially with the focus of newer employees who are now trying to figure out the job logistics, how to be at work, but also the remote piece, all of that together. And so offering this event on Mondays, Mentor Mondays.
Love that name.
Wonderful.
Thanks for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Okay, so we're looking at the last and third indicator, which is trust and openness. And so if we break these down into two separate concepts because they're so intimately related, but they are not the same. Trust looks at our ability to engage in vulnerable discussion and conversation. Now, this is very specifically, trust in the workplace for team connection. So how willing am I to say I can be vulnerable, whether it's about my professional experiences, my personal experiences, my cultural experiences? It goes on and on. How able am I to sustain that and say, I'm going to share this with you without knowing what your reaction is going to be in the workplace? Openness looks at that willingness to do it. And so the willingness to share among people that personal experience. And when we put them together, what we've found is that the best way to build these is by knowing your window of tolerance. So I'm taking this concept from the field of clinical psychology. This is not my own, but I am such a huge advocate of knowing this. I always speak about the window of tolerance, whether it's in something like learning mindfulness, whether it's in stress management, or whether it's team cohesion, team building, culture building. So for all of you who already know this, bear with me. But your window of tolerance is, I want you to literally imagine a window in front of you that's only just a little bit open. So if we look above the window, the part that is not open, the part that is closed, that's when things are too much, right? So to go there is just, you're not ready yet. Those are things you're keeping close to your heart still. When we go below that opening, those are things that you're like, I've already shared that with people. This is no big deal. I have no problem with someone asking me this. The window is somewhere in between. Even the window itself has gradients if we really get into it. But it's that idea of context specific, right? I may be willing to share this part of, again, my lived experience, my aspirations, my lessons learned, my obstacles, my dreams. Knowing that I'm taking a risk doing this, but also knowing that it could lead to a huge win. If I feel comfortable with a manager and I say, I think I can share my aspirations here. I can share that I want a promotion. And I know the risk, but I also know the benefits, and we've already established connection, and we've already established a sense of belonging, and I have enough trust with this person. I can share this, and I can handle the risk. And so knowing your own personal window of tolerance in anything you're doing is going to keep you from harm, but it's also going to propel you toward growth. Because the more and more you do this, the window will slowly open just a little more and just a little more. And you're going to know, we all have those whoops moments where it's like, I think I overshared. I'm not feeling comfortable with this. And that's the moment where we sit with ourselves and say, can this be a growth moment? And in what way? Maybe it's, that was too much and next time I'm going to pull back a little. Or maybe it's, I actually learned something fantastic from this. It actually helped us connect deeper. It helped me get to this goal that I've had because now I've activated a support system, etc. And so now that you think about your own window of tolerance, consider that every single person on your team also has their own window of tolerance, and no one's is the same. And everyone has their own reasons for why their window is as open or as closed as it is. And so what I really want to drive home here is I do not want anyone to be going to their team saying, how can we get this window open? Like, let's force it open. That is not what we want. We want our team to feel empowered to say, this is where I'm at. And then we continue using that window frequently, quickly, authentically through these indicators. And you'll see that in your team, the window naturally starts to open a little bit. And so in that way, we're using that space to build these pieces.
So a lot of the CEOs and leaders, they are concerned about like how we create vulnerability in our teams, like sharing or displaying things of their lives. There are ways and questions that you can ask, and the best way is to think of moments of growth. So when you ask your team, what is a moment of growth, they will immediately think on an opportunity where they have that challenge and overcome that challenge, and that way you can help it to open up. And that's what we want to do today with you, is like now thinking in your window of growth and within your team context. In a few sentences, would you describe a time in your life when you learned a valuable lesson? Once you have described it, what aspects of that experience would you be willing to share with your team? For example, some of you may think like how I built resilience. Some lessons that you learn. Or something perhaps like an element or a mentor or someone you found that helped you. And because this is more personal, we're not going to ask you to share unless you want. But once you have thought about these two questions, now think on a name for the space that you are going to create for your team to be vulnerable. It can be something fun, like fuck up nights.
Exactly.
And find the frequency. And in those fuck up nights, you can check how many people are sharing their stories. What are their stories of growth?
I also want to bring attention to a piece with this metric in particular and this indicator in particular. From a psychological standpoint, I'm going to give you a tidbit. I want you to tap in for a second into what that was like for you when we asked you to think of a moment when you learned a lesson. Did you immediately go to like an oh shit moment? Or was it like a more moderate, like, okay, yeah, I learned a lesson here and it was pretty good and I could share this. So that's your own level of vulnerability that you're tapping into, right? And then when we upped the ante and said, what aspect could you share with your team? That ups the ante a little more. And like Billy said, you have an array of options to choose from, right? And those are each also going to indicate a different level of vulnerability. Remember this when you're asking this of your team. You're asking them to go through this same process of, okay, let me dig as deep as I'm comfortable digging into a lesson I learned. And now what aspect of this am I willing to share? So we always want to be grateful, authentically grateful, and celebrating that someone was even willing to consider this activity, let alone to share it with the team. If you have someone doing that, you have an incredible level of trust in your team already. All right, and so we're at the end of our workshop with you right before we start the Q&A. Just briefly, the recap of what we went over today. We started with explaining, why happy hours are fantastic but not enough. We looked at the science of those different indicators: belonging, trust and openness, connection, the ways in which those can help you at the team level, and also how the team level is essential to culture growth, because that's what actually creates the culture beyond. If you want to tap into your culture, you look at the team level. We looked at those guiding principles: frequency, brevity, ease. And then we went through this, exercise with you to help you start to get those creative juices flowing. We realized that we had a lot of questions that we were throwing your way. We hope that this gets you on the path of building a positive culture at your work. And any way in which we can support you, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to speak with all of you, whether it's, now after the workshop or beyond.
Yeah. And last thing, and this is for your support. As I mentioned, we are co-founders of a tech startup. If you need support with your creating your moments, we have fun games to make those moments special that are already based in science. So we bring into companies elements such as mindfulness, gratitude, reciprocity. We have activities that you can use in 15 minutes or less during your meetings, and we help you track those events.
Yeah. So we'll shift into the Q&A. Did someone say something? Okay. So let's see.
So we have, yeah, there are a few. So you can start with the first one, or last one.
The first one is la primera.
Es que están mandando. The first one will be this one.
Okay, ¿tú quieres empezar con ese? Yo diría con la primera y bajamos a ver.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to read them out loud. Well, and I know you can see them too. So that first one, it's helpful to think through metrics for each of these. That's awesome to hear. I'm curious if you have metrics you've seen work well as a baseline or to hone in on our thinking. So metrics as a baseline, absolutely. So I'd be looking at these indicators. And please let me know if this is not quite what the question meant. I'd be saying as a baseline, what is the sense of belonging on my team? What is the sense of connection on my team, the level of connection? What's the level of trust? I'd also be looking at how engaged or disengaged they tend to be at social events that you currently have. I would also be doing a back review of the events that you've done up until now, seeing do they tend to be unstructured? Do they tend to be structured? Are you able to recall data from those as far as attendance, engagement, feedback? And using that to guide you, because every single person's team and department is going to be different and have different needs. But that is at the most skeletal level, that is how I would be structuring my analysis.
That's great. The second one is, how do you get to buy into spend real time on culture at high leadership levels? I'm going to start with this one, but you can follow up. One of the things that we discovered through our research is when we ask teams about culture, they don't think about culture on the 4 or 3 values that the CEO says. They think about culture and how they feel with their immediate team. So the 5 or 10 people that they spend most time with. So that's an invitation for you as a manager, and also to encourage other managers to work into connection, belonging, and trust with your teams. And then to involve more leadership.
Yeah, so in order to get the buy-in from leadership, I think you have to know your own leadership first. There are some leaders we speak to who are much more operational, who are, a little bit of the Jerry Maguire type, like, show me the ROI, show me the money. I'm not going to waste money and time on things that don't have a profit, and I want it fast. And that's where you make that decision, right? Like, how much is it your responsibility to change how they see things, and how much can it help to know how to use their language to still get what you need for your team? And so these pieces, when we were going through the science, as you saw, you can find data out there that immediately connects these to real concrete operational ROIs. So looking at productivity, looking at engagement, looking at number of absences, looking at promotions that are happening and how quickly, looking at hitting your numbers. You could even establish something where you start to take that data passively so that you're not constantly having to ask your employees. As a manager, you should have access to those things anyway. And then start tracking it specifically after you start these events. And if you're able to show that there's a higher increase across those ROI pieces, that's your case. That's what you're bringing to leadership and saying, something is happening here. Before this, we were seeing a downwards trend. People are leaving. This is what they're saying they want. How about these strategies that are science-based, that already have metrics built into them, or what have you, right? And let's give this a shot.
And I will add that when you talk about culture, it's better not to sit down people and say, let's talk about culture and what are our values. It's more intentional. Is what do we want to cultivate in our teams, and how are we going to measure it? What do you want to see in your team? So I will say also, in organizations, we've seen that a lot of managers have their own meetings with more regional managers. So take that opportunities of those meetings. Take the 15 minutes to kickstart your meeting to do something fun with them. Like, ask them a question that makes them think more about their culture. The next question is, how do you balance structure and unstructured connections to avoid meeting fatigue?
Sure. So I'm going to try not to be too biased, because this is what we've created our company on. We have activities that are embedded into your meeting that replace the typical icebreaker and only take 15 minutes. I would say replicate that model. How can you do something, as Pili was saying, that takes place of the icebreaker? We're all a little sick and tired of going around the Zoom circle and saying how our weekend went, right? Or what's your favorite food? How about something just slightly deeper that's a little more engaging, that taps into those values that you already know matters to your team, because I know you're all excellent leaders already. And how do we get them to engage a little more? That's how I would do it. So we want to avoid that adding on an extra event at the end of the day. We are all experiencing the highest levels of burnout that any of us have societally. The last thing we want to do is burden someone's schedule more. So you're showing your team that you care by saying, you know, let's make these first 10 minutes, 15 minutes count. Let's make them a little deeper. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of why we're here.
How do you find balance between being personal to make connections but not inviting people to get too personal?
Should I take this one?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take this one. I am someone who prefers to lay it all out on the table. So my approach may not resonate quite, like take what I'm suggesting and make it your own. The way I would approach it is literally by saying, I'd love for us to connect more and get to know each other more. I also know sometimes this can be awkward and it can be scary. I want everyone to be aware of what you're comfortable with. And if you want to push yourself a little more and be a little more vulnerable, that would be lovely, but it's not obligated. And then, you know, going into the question you're going to ask or the activity you're going to do, but you are always creating an exit. You are always saying, if you feel more comfortable with your camera off, that is no problem. When I do workshops virtually, that's the case, right? I am not obligating people to be camera on. If you'd prefer to do this through the chat, that's no problem. So then you would read what goes in the chat, but without saying the person's name because it's their choice if they then unmute themselves and elaborate on that. But you're not putting them on the spot because if they chose a chat, it's for a reason. And so in that way, you're creating multiple avenues for people on that spectrum of introvert to extrovert, right? Camera off is fine. Chat is fine. Participating or not participating is fine. Active listening is still participating. Maybe it's in the form of asking follow-up questions. And so you just want to be mindful in those ways. You're helping to protect your team, and they're going to notice that. They're going to appreciate it. And again, always going back to, I know this might be a little vulnerable, so please keep that in mind. I just want to give this a shot. Let me know if this is too much. Let me know if there's something else that you think might work better. And so you're making this a collaborative effort. It's not a top-down approach.
And from my experience, I will also say companies are built out of people, and people come with emotions, and that's what humans are. So that approach of like, this is business and you shouldn't bring your emotions to business, that's something that is like shutting off the person of your team, and you're not gonna get trust from that. So I would say invite them to be more personal. And if you see someone sharing more about their personal lives, just feel comfortable with that because they are feeling comfortable sharing with you. So just appreciate that from that person and recognize that style from that person so you can offer more support and apply empathy and compassion for your team. That will be my approach.
Love that.
So a potential co-founder and I have very different communication and decision-making styles. I went through that. We are trying to see if we can be happy working together before we sign paperwork. Is this a baseline this early on, or can we focus on happy to work from the beginning to lead success? Oh, wow. Yeah. So this is a part of our personal story. I went through a very, very bad toxic relationship with an ex-co-founder, and that pulled me very down deep into depression. And that's how also this beautiful idea of Wanda born, and how I met actually Stephanie. So I would say relationships, to build relationships, you need to be mindful of many aspects of your personality and the other person's personality. We went through 3 weeks of asking more than 50 questions, and we spent almost 3 hours daily just knowing each other through questions. We are happy to share that material with you. Just like contact us at the end if you need it. And we hope that could help you. Any other?
No, I would, just to piggyback on that and reinforce that, like, do not speed through that process. That process is so vital.
Yeah.
And if you speed through it, it's gonna come up in other ways over and over again. So yeah, we took the time. We said 3 weeks is a long time in the tech world, and yet if this means that from here we can create a thriving business, this is the investment that needs to happen. And like Billy said, we went through every single, it was like, you know, a co-founder matching type, like long form questionnaire, but we did it together. And so we were having discussion after every single question and realizing, learning more about each other, how can we complement each other, how can we, again, between us, we're establishing that connection, the sense of belonging, that the potential for it, and the trust.
Yeah, a good sign of your co-founder is not about business at the beginning at all. It's more about the person. And it's very similar to a marriage. So you're not gonna get it like married with the first person that you met on Tinder, right? So just take the time to learn more about their person. And one key metric is see if that person can be vulnerable with you, because that will make the difference for open communication. So you can talk through like all the roller coaster that is to be in a business.
Exactly. And I would say, just for that last part of the question, not a bad sign at all. You don't want someone to be your replica, because then you're just creating an echo chamber. Either way, you always have to be mindful of creating your like echo chamber. But look more, like Billy was saying, like, are you able to talk about it? Are you able to problem solve? Are you able to identify, these are my strengths and areas for growth, these are yours? How can we complement and support each other? Yeah. I want to be mindful of the time.
We can email the answers
Yeah,
to
you
the
know what?
questions.
We'd be more than happy. We're trying to find a way. We could even put this up on our website, maybe? Would be the easiest way.
Email us.
If you want to email us, I know this was anonymous, so the email obviously would take away that factor, but if you're comfortable doing so, please feel free to email us with any questions. If you want us to answer these for you, we'd be more than happy to. We're also planning on attending as many DSW events as we can. So if you see us around, please say hi. And lastly, should we put up the slide with our contact info?
Right.
Yeah, so please feel free to connect with us. Those are our LinkedIn profiles. That's our primary area of social media that we really thrive on. Organic marketing is coming on our Bonda LinkedIn. We're very excited to be creating that right now. And then you can also go to our website if you want to find out more about Bonda. We're actually very excited. We're about to launch our beta at the end of this month, and we're right now creating our first client cohort. So if your company has any interest in that whatsoever, you can sign up and join our wait list. It's about 70 companies long right now, and we're very excited for that. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here with us.
Quick thing, in a Slido, you will find a link to our website. So it's easy. Yeah.
Thank you both. You guys did amazing. Appreciate it.